Good afternoon. This is the regular meeting of the Historic Preservation and Design Review of City of Sonoma, and it's 6 o'clock, and I'm opening the meeting. Do we have any public comment?
We'll do roll call first. Commissioner Drake?
So, could you please make a roll call, please?
Commissioner Drake?
Present.
Pressure button.
Present.
Commissioner Goldberg?
Present.
Commissioner Harren?
Present.
Commissioner Randolph?
Present.
Vice Chair JAHROMI?
Present.
Chair AMAR is absent, and Youth Member TORESS is absent as well.
Thank you. So the next thing, approval of agenda. Any motion to approve the agenda?
So moved. Yes, I move we approve the agenda.
Second?
I second the motion.
Roll call, please.
Aye.
Oh, 1 second. Commissioner Drake?
Aye.
Commissioner Goldberg?
Aye.
Commissioner Harren?
Aye.
Commissioner Randolph?
Aye.
And Vice Chair JAHROMI?
Aye.
The motion passes 6-1.
Thank you. And any comment from the public? Okay. And items on consent calendar, the minutes of last regular meeting. Any motion to approve that?
I make a motion to approve the minutes from May 14th, 2024.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Drake?
Aye.
Commissioner Goldberg?
Aye.
Commissioner Harren?
Aye.
Commissioner Randolph?
Aye.
And Vice Chair JAHROMI?
Aye.
The motion passes
Thank you.
6-1.
All right, we move to public hearing on item number 301, discussion, consideration, and possible action to approve a sign permit S248 at 19101 Sonoma Highway, including action to approve a categorical exemption pursuant to section 15301 of the state CEQA guideline, class 1 existing facilities.
Please ignore that.
Staff report, please.
Sure. Jennifer Gates, Community Development Director. Ignore that first slide. I just realized the error. So again, this is the project site on Sonoma Highway at 19101, and it is in the Maxwell Village Shopping Center, and it is zoned commercial. It has changed ownership, so we are changing signage. So this was a structure built in 1988. It's 1 story. It's a standalone restaurant, again, in the Maxwell Shopping Center. This is a request to place new signage for our new tenant, Los Molcajetes, including our internally illuminated wall sign on Sonoma Highway elevation, and then a wall sign at the southwest corner, which is facing the parking lot. The total aggregate proposed is 36, almost 37 square feet. So this is the one sign that's on the southwest corner wall sign that actually is pointed towards the parking lot, so individuals know where to go. It's 5 square feet. It is not illuminated, and it consists of block letters. And this is the second sign. This is the larger sign that is on the wall. The wall that's facing Sonoma Highway, it is 26.4 square feet, and it consists of channel letters that are interior illuminated and has a halo illumination that will cast on the wall. And so you kind of get that idea from that image provided. So in the analysis completed by our contract planner, Alina Lip, it does comply with all the requirements for the signage as well as the lighting requirements. It does meet all the findings required for signage, including all of our policies and our design guidelines, and is consistent with the overall signage on the site. We added a condition of approval just in regards to our lighting standards and maintenance that you've seen before. These are our additional conditions of approval. It is exempt for CEQA purposes. It is an existing facility and allows new copy on existing signs. And the recommendation is to approve the sign permit as proposed, subject to the findings and conditions of approval. And staff is available to answer any questions. And I'm not sure, is the applicant here? No. Okay.
No applicant. Do you have any comment from public?
No, we don't do on Zoom anymore, so we can skip that part.
Are there any questions first from the commission? No? You have a question?
I do. I didn't see anything when I was looking at it remotely regarding the color temperature of the illumination. Is there anything in the municipal code that talks about that? So we don't oversee that at all? Okay. That was my only question.
Correct. We don't oversee the color temperature. It's something that we'll probably be looking at. Planning Commission is requesting to see a night sky ordinance, and we'll start discussions on that.
I have 2 comments.
So just a reminder, so we do questions first, and then we open it up to public comment. If no public comment, then we come back to comments.
Well, given that there's nobody here to speak, I won't ask any questions.
Okay. Any public comment on this?
Neil Caldwell, Well Designed Premium Signage. I just want to speak on common color temperatures. Being in the sign industry, I could just share that the most common for this type of fabricated channel letter is probably 5000 K. It's just a bright white color. So in most of the signage that my firm works on, if people are going to see a lot of the illuminated, like the halo, we would probably specify something more like a 3000 or 4000. Once you put a red film on something, like the red lettering that you're seeing there, whether it's 5000 K or 4000 K, doesn't make a huge difference, just because primarily you're going to see whatever temperature the vinyl covering is on it. But the light emanating behind this, if it's 5000 K, could have kind of a bluish type glow to it. So that's just context from where the sign industry is sort of at right now. But being able to specify those color temperatures at a fabrication level is very easy and common to do. All right.
Thank
that's all.
you.
Yeah.
Before you leave,
Yes.
any other question for the applicant,
I'm not the applicant.
the designer? So, thank you.
Yep.
Okay. Back to public comment is closed. Back to the commissioners. Commissioner Drake, any comment?
Well, just, one comment is that this is, I believe, the 3rd location of this restaurant. So I've seen at least one of them in Santa Rosa, and this signage is more or less consistent with that. So I don't think we'd want to go and change it in any significant way. The other thing is more like a question about the fact that the corner sign is not lighted in the parking lot, and I guess that's their decision to make and not ours to suggest, although I don't know why they wouldn't want it lit. It's not necessarily needed now at this time of the year, but in the winter, it seems to me it would be almost a safety issue if it were lit, the smaller sign on the corner of the building.
Thank you. Commissioner Haren?
I agree with Commissioner Drake about if it was possible to light the sign on the corner, I would suggest it, specifically in the winter. I don't know if that's a restriction on allowable square footage of lighted or illumination for signs, but a suggestion for the applicant. I think that is a good one. And then other than that, very straightforward, and I wish this business the best of luck.
Thank you. Commissioner Goldberg?
I have no comment.
Commissioner Randolph?
Yeah, this is super straightforward, and I have no problem if the applicants want to light the other sign at this point. I am a little concerned if we start having too many lighted signs all over. But anyway, this application I think is very straightforward. I don't have a problem with it.
Okay. I too find the application very straightforward, no specific comment. Any motion to approve this item?
I make a motion to approve agenda point 3.1, subject to findings and conditions of approval.
Second. All right, roll call, please.
Commissioner Drake,
Aye.
Commissioner Goldberg,
Aye.
Commissioner Haren,
Aye.
Commissioner Randolph,
Aye.
and Vice Chair Jerome.
Aye.
The motion passes 6-1.
Thank you very much. Next item, item number 3.2, discussion, consideration, and possible action to approve a sign permit as 24/7 at 550 2nd Street West, including action to approve a categorical exemption pursuant to section 15301 and 15311 of the state CEQA guideline. All right, do we have applicant?
Okay. So first I'll give a staff report and then we'll allow the applicant to speak after commissioner
Oh, I'm
questions.
sorry, yeah.
So this is, again, a project site. It's the Sonoma Valley Inn, and it's at 552nd Street West, so across from the Whole Foods Shopping Center, or Marketplace as we know it. This is a existing hotel that's been here for since the 80s, and it's a 2-story hotel. Currently has Best Western branding, and the brand suggestion is to basically simplify to just the Sonoma Valley Inn. There are 2 clock tower signs, which is what we're calling them, on this tower, and then also a monument sign that will be modified. So the previous approval went through for exterior changes, including colors and removal of a porte-cochere in November. So if you look at it today, that porte-cochere is gone, and a new awning is going up. So the request is to replace the existing internally illuminated wall sign on the clock tower. The copy is going to remain the same, but the font will be updated. And also to replace the externally illuminated monument sign with an internally illuminated monument sign, and it will remove the Best Western branding. And this is a total of 98.65 square feet. So there are 2 signs on the clock tower, and again, it's internally illuminated, and it will be simple block letters. And then we have the monument sign. So it is 1 sign with 2 faces. It is 31 square feet on each side. It is internally illuminated, so only the white would shine with light. It is going to be painted that metallic copper color. It is 7 feet high and 4 feet wide, and it is set back 6 feet from the sidewalk. Elena Lip, our contract planner, did perform the analysis, and it does comply with all of the requirements of the code, including our lighting requirements as well. It does meet the findings for signage, including our design guidelines. Again, it's the same additional conditions of approval in regards to lighting and our maintenance of our signs. We're proposing the CEQA exemption for existing facilities and accessory structures because the new monument sign is a new structure. So that's why we're looking at both. And staff's recommendation is to approve the sign permit as proposed, subject to the findings and conditions of approval. And staff's available to answer any questions, and the applicant is here as well.
Thank you. Do you like to make any presentation?
Neil Colwell, well-designed premium signage. We're the design and build partner for this project. I'm also joined by the hotel's GM, Kendall Comfort, that can answer any questions that would be best as related to ownership. So basically what you're looking at today is just an update on the sign program to come into sort of continuity with the other updates of the hotel. If you've been by recently, the removal of the porte-cochere as well as the updated paint scheme, all of that is really coming together. So signage is basically just sort of dovetailing into this project. In terms of what we're looking to achieve, as staff reported, The copy on the clock tower is staying, the business name is essentially still Sonoma Valley Inn, so that will remain. Lighting will be 3000K, if you wanted to know that aspect. We're updating the font on that. Otherwise, it's pretty much a direct replacement. The monument sign is going to be, while similar in square footage, the fact that we're rotating it into a portrait, more upright position, and then it's going to be set in a little bit further from the property. And in my opinion, it's an elevated design over the previous Best Western version. Should be a really nice update. So we're going for a natural tone on the paint color on that. All of our paints have a satin sheen to them, so it won't have like a high luster or gloss to it at all. And just the white copy, as staff again reported, will be illuminated. I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone has.
Thank you. Any question for the applicant?
As a materiality question, when it says painted copper and it's on stainless steel, is that a copper finish that is a living finish that can age and patina into a green, or is that a sealed copper and it's a paint, not the metal substrate?
It's a sealed paint.
Okay, great. Thanks for
Yep,
confirming.
absolutely.
Any other question?
Just a curiosity question. I'm assuming no ownership or franchise changes. This is still a Best Western?
It is not an ownership change.
Not an ownership change, but it will be changing from Best Western to Hilton.
Okay. I have one comment. My son was just married here last weekend, and he put a block on the whole place and had a very positive experience at your property. Yeah.
You never knew how that could go.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any other public comments? No. Public comments is closed. Back to the commission. Commissioner Drake?
Well, I think it's an uptick. I like it. I think anytime you have a more local, interesting brand on the street, I think that's a good sign, pun intended. So I'm very happy with it.
Thank you. Commissioner Goldberg?
I actually stayed here before we decided to move to town, and it was pre-update, so I'm very excited to see your update. And it's a property that's warm and dear to my heart because that's where we decided that we were going to make Sonoma our home. So I'm excited for your new success.
Thank you. Commissioner Randolph?
Yeah. I wanted to compliment you on the upgraded signage as well. It was always problematic. I know you guys had to have the Best Western signage there, but that signage came here years ago, and it was just complicated getting everything on there to be satisfactory from a design standpoint. So I love the architectural changes you've made. It's been really visible from the street, and I think this is going to be a great look for the hotel. So well done.
Thank you. Commissioner HAREN?
Fairly straightforward approval, complies with all design requirements, both from a design and code. And then on an additional note, I really like it. Yeah. I think it's beautiful. So approved on my end.
Thank you. And I too agree that this is a very straightforward design and very appropriate to the size of the tower and everything else. Thank you. With that, any motion to approve this item?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Drake,
Aye.
Commissioner Goldberg,
Aye.
Commissioner HAREN,
Aye.
Commissioner Randolph,
Aye.
Vice Chair JAHROMI.
Aye.
The motion passes 6-1.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your presentation. All right. Do we have any item to discuss by any commissioner or?
I have a question. I've just noticed that things have been passing 6-1, and I'm curious. There are 5 of us here, and I don't understand that counting.
That's my fault. It's 5-1.
And why the 1? Is there
Because we have one absent.
absent?
Yes.
That's an absent
But in my,
vote.
I know we're supposed to have 7, so in my brain there's 7.
Okay.
So
Thank you.
That's my mistake.
Thank you.
All right. Director, do we have any comments, report, or anything?
So I do have one item for discussion. So this is a presentation on the Secretary of Interior standards for the treatment of historic properties. And I wanted to, it's not as long as it could be, because I know some of you have done some trainings that have been super long. So it's kind of a refresher for those, and then kind of a start to the conversation for others. And then I left you a tree at your desk. Which, yes, but this one is specific to rehabilitation. So we're gonna talk a little bit about rehabilitation today and just start that conversation. Because I wanted to start it before we start getting into the code. I went, so just as a preface, I went to the California Preservation Foundation Conference, and I gave 2 sessions, one on CEQA and then the other one on preservation ordinances. And it just kind of brought it back of like, you know, it all starts at the standards in a lot of cases. And so how do we, again, think about the standards and how we approach our projects? And so that is why I decided to go ahead and start this way, and then answer any questions that you have, and then hear from you about kind of what else you guys want to learn about as well. So to start off with, so the Secretary of Interior Standards treatment for historic properties, there are 4 different treatments. We usually don't talk about, it's gonna restart my computer, hold on, close. We don't usually talk about many of them because the one that we use the most often in our projects that we're gonna see is rehabilitation. There have been some other types of project, I think, in the past, including a restoration, but I'll get there. So the preservation, this requires the retention of the greatest amount of our historic fabric form. So basically no modifications, no change, nothing, repair in place. Rehabilitation acknowledges that need to alter or add new to our historic building, and that is to continue to meet our new uses, but still retain our historic character. Restoration is about depicting a building at a particular time in its history by preserving those materials and removing things from its past that have been added since, and then restoring some of that. There are good examples nationwide of restoration. An example here locally is our train depot. That was a restoration project. That train depot is not the original one. Some people know this, some people don't. But that's an example. Well, that's actually an example of a reconstruction. Restoration would also be if it was deteriorated to a point and then we restored it and took away other pieces of it. I think one of our houses that we own is one of those. Reconstruction is the depot. Sorry, I got them confused. I forgot that it was completely gone. So again, bringing something back to where it was. And you don't see this very often. It's very costly to reconstruct a historic structure, or to come back or restore a structure back to a specific time. You see this every once in a while, but not really common. So the appropriate treatment for historic property is dependent on a number of items. The first one is really the level of significance. So when we look at our state park in our plaza, that in itself has National Historic Landmark significance. So we're not gonna do a rehabilitation and do new additions to that structure or any of those structures there. What you're gonna see in most cases is probably a restoration or, you know, let's say one of the buildings had burned down and they wanted to put it back, you would see a reconstruction. But most times we're gonna just preserve what's there. And that's the state park in town is a good example of that. Also, you know, the physical condition of the structure itself determines what that is. So again, going back to reconstruction is really used when you're going to rebuild it, or if you're restoring it, it's going to be, you know, extensive work potentially. If alterations or new additions are necessary, then rehabilitation is what we're going to be doing. Again, proposed uses. It's hard to adapt sometimes some of our historic buildings to new uses if it's going to maintain its look and feel and its historic accuracy. So if we're preserving it, sometimes it's hard to convert it to something different of how we want to use it. We have good examples, other examples on the square of how we've converted some of our historic buildings that may have been more residential to commercial. We have El Dorado Hotel was completely different and has been a hotel that's been modified over time repeatedly. And then, of course, we have codes and other regulations. So we have the state building code, which we do have a historic building code that we can use. We have accessibility requirements, sustainability requirements, things that do modify features. One that comes to mind that I was dealing with a lot in Southern California is that we had a lot of structures that still had wood shingle roofs in a very high fire zone. And so how do you work with some of those historic character features that today's codes are like, no, we've got to treat those, we can't have wood, those types of aspects. So that's how we continue to look at and apply our treatments. We also want to look at what those character defining features are. So we are going to choose a treatment, but we need to know what those features of that structure are. What is the character defining features? And that's going to be told in our historic resource evaluation or the DPR, the Department of Parks and Recreation form that tells us actually what's historic about this property. Is it who lived there? Is it the architecture itself? Is it a specific style of architecture that maybe this architect was known for and it had specific features that need to be retained? So what is significant about this structure? And again, that could also be overall craftsmanship of something. This example that you see, I worked for a period of time, and so most of these pictures are going to be from my past. I've done this presentation a long time ago, and I kind of updated it a little bit, but used a lot of those same pictures. So Spanish Colonial Revival was the style in a jurisdiction that I worked with in the past. And so there's very specific aspects of Spanish Colonial Revival in this community. And one of them is the actual stucco treatment and the craftsmanship of the stucco itself. So a smooth stucco is actually not historically accurate in these cases because it's going to be all hand troweled. And so we had a very specific, if you were doing repair work, we had specific specifications on a 3 application system, and I would have to go out and look at your trowel work to determine its consistency. And so that's the level of detail that some places will get into. Another example, as you can see here, is an arched door. Can't get a Home Depot door to fit in that arched door. So that's kind of one of those things where that specific door is character defining to this house. And so replacing it with a square or changing the size of that window opening could change that look of that structure. So again, which ones are the highly significant? Which ones, so they should be protected and preserved? Which ones are just significant? So we want to repair them or, replace in kind, or they're not significant. They've already been altered. So we really need to replace them. In some cases, the windows have been changed multiple times by now. So there's no character there anymore. So replacing them is not going to affect that. But if it still has its surround and its trim work, maybe that's what is significant still. So in rehabilitation, that is what the packet that I gave you. And so when we talk about rehabilitation, there are a set of standards, and we're going to go through them, not in a high level of detail, but just if you have questions about specific ones, I'm happy to talk about them. But of all those treatments that we talked about, rehabilitation is the only one that's going to allow alterations and the construction of new additions. And so this is the one that we apply most often, and this is the one when we talk about CEQA findings, If they meet the standards, it's going to be in regards to its rehabilitation standards. So those standards, there are 10 of them. And so when we are asking for a report on how a project meets the Secretary of Interior standards, we want responses to each of these 10 items on how a project meets those standards. So, again, number one, a property will be used as it was historically or given a new use that requires minimal change. Most cases, we are commercial properties being reused as commercial, residential being reused as residential. Sometimes we see commercial now being converted to residential. In other places I've lived, small churches were being converted into homes and things like that. The second one is the historic character of the property will be retained, and removal of distinctive materials or alterations, spaces and spatial relationships will be avoided. So again, looking back at what are our character defining features and, working to retain and preserve those. Each property will be recognized as a physical record of its time. Changes that create a false sense of historical development will not be undertaken. I always like to give an example of this. I do not have a picture. I do personally, but I'm not sharing it. My family home in Redondo Beach was built in the 1890s by my great-great-grandfather. And in the 70s, so it was a vernacular Victorian, which was very simple, beach house, very simple. And in the 70s, a couple moved in and made it a Queen Anne style. And so it is actually listed on the local register as a Queen Anne Victorian. We know that it's not. So again, a little false history added. All the gingerbread was added in the 70s. But the overall form and shape of the building, nothing's changed. It's all still the redwood interior, the same shapes inside. Everything is the same. They just added some gingerbread. So number 4, changes to the property that have acquired historic significance in their own right will be retained and preserved. Sometimes you find that a historic property has had an addition, and it could be that that addition was by a famous architect at a very specific period in their time, and it's a good example of what they have done. So that would be something that would have acquired significance in its own right. And so that has been a modification. Let's say it was 1800s and then 80s or 70s. I won't go to the 80s yet. So I won't go to the Gary additions, but things like that could acquire significance. Distinctive materials, features, finishes, construction techniques. I kind of gave an example of that when we were talking about the Spanish colonial. Number 6, deteriorated historic features will be repaired rather than replaced unless it's severely deteriorated. And, the main aspect of replacement is let's try to match design, color, texture, and where possible materials. And we shouldn't be replacing missing features unless we actually have evidence that those existed in the first place. So again, going back to that false history. Chemical or physical treatments will be the gentlest means possible. A good example of this, if you sandblast a brick building, you are deteriorating that building at a rapid rate because you have now removed that hard feature of the brick and you've exposed it to water, and the inside of a brick is actually soft. So if you look at adobe structures, it's the same idea. It's why we always coat on the outside of adobes, though we have obviously one that's exposed, but that needs continual preservation efforts. Archaeology is an aspect, so we do look at archaeology, and this doesn't necessarily mean just our native archaeological resources. This could be historical resources as well. We like to joke, which is serious too. The best resource in archaeology for historic artifacts is actually the loo. the outdoor toilets are actually where you find all kinds of trash. It's where all the trash was dumped. So it has the best information about history inside of it. And those are typical archaeology, historical resources. New additions, exterior alterations, or related new construction that will not destroy those historic materials, features, and spatial relationships that characterize the property. And the new work would be differentiated from the old, but compatible. Compatible is always a hard word, and I'll talk a little bit about it tonight, but we can talk more later. But the compatibility is in regards to materials, features, size, scale. It's basically every aspect of that addition. And then lastly, that new additions and adjacent or related new construction will be undertaken in a manner that if removed in the future, the essential form and integrity of a historic property and its environment would be unimpaired. So that's a key aspect is, can you remove it and put back what was? And that's always a question that I ask. So the National Park Service has a lot of resources on especially rehabilitation treatment. And so this is just one example of, it's an older section of their website, but they have a section called Rehab Yes, Rehab No. And so they actually talk about what is good examples of implementation of the standards and then what are bad examples of the standards. And so these are just, I'm going to do just 2 slides on some of them that they provide in this resource. And I'll give everybody a copy of the presentation. So one example is the windows that are on the left. And you can see the historic windows were double hung, divided light 6/6. And then on the right, you can see that they were installing a vinyl double hung window. And you obviously can see in this case a distinct character difference. So this is not following standard number 2, where the historic character of the property will be retained and preserved. On the right, if I didn't have those numbers there, would you be able to tell that that's actually an addition on top of a historic building? All right. So 1890 is on the bottom, and then they did an addition to the top, and it basically looks like an extrusion of the 1890 building, and it was built in 1980, so they added the 1980 on top. So this is not following number 3 or 10. Each property will be recognized as a physical period of its own time, place, and use. So this is an example of that. This is an example of a porch modification on the top, so and the bottom. These are before and afters. So on the top, you can tell that basically they joined the porch. It's 2 separate entrances because it's a duplex, potentially maybe even a quad. But you have 2 separate entrances, so you have 2 separate porch entrances, and that's and then it was joined at some time. So according to the National Park Service, that it doesn't meet number 2, standard number 2, because again, the removal of a distinctive material or alteration of a feature or a space that characterize that property will be avoided. And then the bottom one is actually doesn't comply with standard number 9. Because new additions, exterior alterations, or related new construction will not destroy the historic materials and features of that characterize that property. So you can't see the front of this building in this picture. You can just see that porch and how it changed. But it's a very simple warehouse building, and so it had a very simple loading dock. And that's what that awning is for, is that loading dock. And at some time, it was modified and created with columns and a more pronounced porch look. And so in this case, it wouldn't comply with standard number 9. It doesn't mean overall that the project doesn't meet the standards. I want to say that when we talk about it may not comply with this, but is there a way to mitigate that impact is something that we look at. And we look at the project as a whole as well. So not just one individual feature. Let's say that a project came forward with just that porch. Yes, we would look at that feature too and how that affects the house overall. So this is an example of a project I worked on. You can like it or not like it. It's just a project in the town that I worked at previously a long time ago. So in this case, there was an addition to a historic resource. And obviously you can see that that addition is the pop-up in the back. So when we worked with this applicant, we look at, all right, how are we distinguishing this from the historic resource? Can it be removed in the future? What character features makes it different than others? And so we worked hard with the applicant to do different types of Spanish colonial features. So like this twin window set with a little column in between. The mullion design on the windows were different. The rafter tails were different. So we worked to distinguish. Probably takes a more, designer eye to see those. But it's something that we worked with this applicant on. So this, you can see what it looks like from the street and how far set back it is. So it is that pop-up that you see in the back. There was an addition. You could kind of see that there's a number, 154, that's the address. And that's kind of where an addition was previously that connected the back of the house to the garage. And so we connected to that older addition as well. And they did further modifications in the back that had already been modified over time. So we focused most of the addition and work towards the rear of the structure. I did not do these, but this is the same town. And again, Spanish colonial revival was their thing. And so this is another example of additions to get more square footage, wanted to do 2 stories. And so how do we set back those additions that still retain the bungalows? I mean, there were 700 square feet in most cases. So how do we get more square footage, do an addition that is set back and is compatible, but not matchy-matchy. So those were a couple of examples. This is an example that I'm curious. Do you recognize this roof line at all? This is local. So from just looking at it, I don't know if you can see on your screens, but there's like a scallop detail in that gable end, and you can see we've got kind of like a square four-sided roof pitch, so it's kind of Victorian a little right there. I don't know if you can see that just a little bit. Here's the building. So this is my example of why we don't put additions on the front. And so I don't know if you've never noticed that, but I was coming out of Whole Foods the other day and I was like, wait, there's a Victorian back there. This is very common. And I see this actually on Broadway. There's another one on Broadway as well at MacArthur, where the spa is across from the gas station. They also have a 1960s edition on the front of their bungalow as well, their Victorian bungalow. So again, this is very common, but every once in a while you do see people asking for something similar. So not something that you would normally see today, but this, you can see it on Sonoma Highway. There's a lot of little additions on the front of some of these residential structures when they converted to commercial. Now we look at these structures and we say, okay, let's retain that historic character, but yet still make them commercial uses. So we have a lot of examples of that on Broadway and West Napa, of where we've retained historic character of the Victorians or the Spanish colonials or Tudor, and they are still being used as commercial uses. So it is possible to modify a structure. So that concludes my presentation. I just curious if anybody else noticed the Victorian behind, or if I was the only one.
Thank you very much. That was very informative. I have a question for you. I understand when you make a modification to an existing building, code requires some level of accessibility improvement in the existing condition. And I know that in historical preservation also that applies. And I also understand that when you want to enforce the accessibility, you have a limitation on the budget, because this is a portion of what the applicant wants to spend on that modification that you force them to use for accessibility. To what extent the historical building are enforcing accessibility without consideration of financial limitation?
Say your question one more time.
To what level in historical rehabilitation or modification to any existing historical building, code can force the improvement for accessibility?
So for accessibility specifically, there's a couple of different activities. So for, let's say it is historic and we're going to a commercial use, we are still going to look at it to make sure that it does meet accessibility requirements. We're also going to look at how can we retain our historic character. There's actually a whole bulletin from the National Park Service on accessibility. What we do is we look at alternative means in some cases that's equal to. So new construction, non-historic buildings, we are going to look at what can we do. The valuation component applies regardless. So of what's going to be required or what you have done or put into your project, that value is applies regardless if you're historic or not. Now, when we start talking about what those alternative means are, some examples are what you'll see is maybe a dropped threshold, and the ramp is in the inside of the structure instead of on the outside. So your door header stays in the same place, but your threshold's going to be lowered, and then you're going to have a ramp inside. Other cases, you're going to see an alternative access. El Dorado Hotel is an example of that, and so is, I'm going to forget, the Girl in the Fig Hotel. Sonoma Hotel. They both have alternative access points for their hotels for their accessibility. So you see big, huge signs that point for you to go and do a path around to the accessible entrances. And then those entrances are made accessible. They may not be on the front of the structure, they may be on the side or in the rear where modifications have occurred repeatedly. Where we've put, in the city of Sonoma and City Hall, we put the elevator on the inside. I have seen where courthouses or historic courthouses in California, the elevator is actually on the outside, and it's an addition, maybe in the rear of the structure, but it accesses every level. So I've seen lots of different things as far as alternates to what we would normally say, you need to go front door if it's new construction. So there is flexibility. The Historic Building Code also allows flexibility. An example of that is if you are maintaining your openings of your window sizes, you do not have to meet the egress requirements. You do need alternative means, but you do not need to meet that egress requirement. Once you touch things, you start activating code requirements because it's no longer historic character that you're maintaining. Another example of this is on bathrooms. Your window in a shower stall, our historic glass would shatter, right, and cut somebody. you're supposed to have tempered glass. You can't use historic glass. What you do is you put a film. And so that's what your alternative is. You can put film, or you can do a new window pane type insert. And so those are the different types of things that we look at when we're talking about meeting code requirements. There's also a whole bulletin, there's actually a whole guidelines on sustainability and historic preservation. I can send you guys a link. It goes all the way into like green roofs on historic buildings and application of solar. It's very detailed because we're talking not just our single family homes that we deal with, but on a national level, we're talking, government, lots of government buildings that we apply these standards. My very first job while I was in grad school was working on, it's called Section 106, which is our Historic Preservation Act, is the application of these standards on a national historic landmarks. So, yeah, additions to new visitor entry points on the mall in Washington, D.C. I mean, lighting on tennis courts at the Naval Academy, just different types of things.
I have a question.
Any other question for John?
Yeah, I have a question. So, just kind of from a practical standpoint, I think of people coming to Sonoma, purchasing a beautiful property that is in the historic overlay, let's say, potentially has some significance to it, and then running into all the things that they run into if they start a project. And I'm just wondering, in your experience, do you think people know many of these things before they purchase a property, or is it more like they start and then kaboom, the mountains of paper start falling on them, the requirements? Because it can seem like it can be very challenging to get your project done.
It can be challenging in the sense of not knowing where you're going with your project, or starting with that understanding before you actually start your project. We've getting a lot of window requests right now, and they've already ordered the windows. They're sitting in their garage, and like those types of things that, and these are actually listed resources, not even, I may or may not be, I know I have an older home, but it's just an old home scenario. So there's a couple of different things. One is, regardless of the historic overlay, if it's 45 years old or the way the ordinance is written, it needs to be evaluated, no matter what kind of project you're doing. So that's something that we'll discuss a little bit more. Also, one of the projects Natalie's working on is grabbing all the information from all of our surveys that we have completed, all of the HREs that have been completed on all the properties, and get them all in a database and get that up on our city GIS, so that accurate information is out there, and then making sure that the realtors are providing that information and disclosing everything at the beginning. So realtor training is key. Especially when somebody just purchases the property and has these grand plans of how they're going to demolish it and build their dream home. And so those are types of things that we need to talk about and move forward, on how we want to address, a window change versus a whole new home or a whole new addition. And also the education component. One of the things that I noticed with this city is we haven't done a comprehensive survey. So we are having individuals do reviews on every project right now, instead of, in some cases, some cities will do, maybe they'll block out parts of the city. We're such a small city. I could see a citywide comprehensive survey. Look at the resources that we've already identified. Like, we know that we updated Broadway, and when we updated Broadway, some of those resources came off because they've been modified since that original time. And so they're no longer historic. That's important to know. And so also looking at these other properties and say, okay, we did a survey, so we don't necessarily maybe need somebody to do that HRE anymore. So that's one thing. The city could be more proactive if there's direction to do so. The other is there's no historic context for this city. Shocking, I know. So historic context actually talks about periods of history in a city's development history. And talks about the individuals that were important during that time frame, different types of construction, and it looks at kind of that broad stroke characteristics of the city. And so when somebody says, you know, I'm going to look at this house for a historic resource report, they can go to that context and say, this falls within this period of development. Does it meet these aspects of what's important to this city's history, and kind of more quickly complete those evaluations is one of those aspects.
I might comment that
I'm sorry, with permission, I have a 7 o'clock appointment that I need to leave for. And I do have 3 questions. I might carry them over to our next meeting if that's possible. All right. I think we're very fortunate to have you here as a resource in
Oh
our
my gosh,
city.
yes.
Very, very impressed, Jennifer, with everything you know and have experienced, so thank you.
Thanks. And you can always send the questions via email as well.
I'll do that.
Okay.
So I was going to say, I might comment that I know, and you probably know too, that there's a project going on with the Historical Society, not the League, but the Historic Society, and they have some money to do some work on the cemetery, on doing a big survey of the cemetery, and I think it's going to yield a lot of information that could feed back into what you just said about historical context. And I was speaking to someone like 2 days ago who was telling me too that they are planning on doing oral interviews with 40 individuals here in town who are pioneers, I guess you would say, of Sonoma. And so that should be pretty fascinating as well. So I don't know if it could, you know, contribute additional information to our history of our little town.
We have a lot of history here. I was surprised that we don't have a cultural resource element in our general plan, and there's not a historic context for the city. I was actually kind of surprised. And there's a lot of history written during periods of time. You know, there's another little thing that I laugh about. So now you see a historic resource evaluation in the DPR forms, usually multiple pages. When I worked in the National Park Service and looked at National Historic Landmarks, when they were first designating them in the late 60s, early 70s, they were a paragraph. And it was like, wait, what? So when you look at some of these old surveys, they're like, oh, it's this date, so it's historic. And you can see that a lot on the plaza in that one. And it's like, oh, yeah, that needs some attention a little bit more. But all things, good things, moving forward. I'm just going to jump to director's comments, which is the next item, unless you have any other questions. You can ask him now. I was just going to talk about the general plan, so you go ahead.
I'll just one. So interiors was considered as a character defining feature, and I was just curious when and why would we get involved in interiors? Could you just give an example? Typically, we're really focused on an exterior and experience of the building. So curious.
Sure. Depends on the city and depends on their ordinance. So remember in my presentation last month, it was all preservation is local. That includes interiors. You know, when I did the preservation ordinance presentation for at the CPF conference, Pasadena also gave a presentation. So they have some green and green original craftsman structures with original interiors. So they actually have marked those interiors as historic as well, which they are allowed to do under their code. You don't typically see residential properties because they're not accessible to the public. I have seen where a city said, well, I can see it from the public right of way, so therefore it's still a public benefit. Other places that I've seen it are, post office. So when all the post offices were closing down, do you remember that? All the historic post offices were closing. They had WPA, Works Progress Administration murals on the inside on a lot of these structures. And so the murals themselves are historic are historic features. You see these in old bank buildings as well, the old tellers and things like that. And so how do we retain that if possible when we convert to new uses? Is it possible? Is it feasible? Those are the character defining features. The reason why in this case specifically that they talk about them in the National Park Service guidance is because if you have a tax credit project, a federal income tax credit project, you have to retain your interiors as part of your project. If your interiors are historic, you retain them. So when you go into some of these historic hotels that maybe were offices and you look up and you see the transoms and you see original doorways and things like that, that is because they were a tax credit project. And so that is that historic corridors. I went into one in Kansas City. That was an apartment building converted to a hotel. It still had the milk doors. So that was really cool.
Okay, yeah, I just we never hear about it.
You don't. It's we don't have really large structures that are going to use the federal income tax credit, and so you don't see that as often. I worked in Tulsa, and so we had tons of tax credit projects and hotels, old historic hotels, and so we did a lot of interior work.
Thank you. So your comments?
So again, general plan. We're in the midst of this. We're getting ready to start the land use discussion, so we're not quite into writing elements. I haven't really heard a lot about historic, to be honest, and cultural resources. And so when we get to that point of starting to write the element and looking at policies, we'll be bringing that to you all. But I'm very interested to hear more from the community. Everybody talks about community character, but what does that mean? And so we did talk a little bit about what does that mean to individuals at one of the workshops that we did, but I think there's probably more conversation around that to come. So we're going to have another meeting with Planning Commission and City Council this month. We just had one last Wednesday and started the conversation around land use and how we want to grow as a city, and change, not change. And then, so we'll continue that discussion this month. And so that is a project that is ongoing and that I would recommend that everybody just stay aware of. So that's it for me.
Thank you very much. Any comments from commissioners? Any item you want to discuss? Thank you. It's about 7:05 p.m. and the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.